Bob Whitaker was 72 years old, a retired shop teacher who had spent his whole life in Virginia in a small brick house on a quiet street lined with dogwoods outside Richmond. And he liked to say he could still plane a board straight enough to please his first foreman. He had built the porch swing with his own hands, hung it under the eaves, and painted it the same pale gray as the trim so it looked like it had always been there. But lately, the swing moved more from the wind than from two people sitting side by side. His wife, Linda, was 68, neat as a pin, careful with her hair and careful with her words. And Bob had loved her steady way for 45 years. The way she folded towels the exact same way, and the way she cut sandwiches on the diagonal because she said triangles tasted better. In winter, they used to work crosswords together and argue kindly over 7-letter birds. But in the last year, something had gone quiet between them. Linda started carrying her phone everywhere, like a fragile egg, and turning her body slightly when she read it. And Bob told himself it was nothing, just news or church ladies planning a bake sale. But sometimes he opened the fridge late at night and saw a glow behind him that wasn't the light bulb. It was the light of the screen on Linda's face in the hallway mirror. And then the light went dark when she noticed him, and she would say, "Couldn't sleep," in a voice that tried to sound normal. On a soft Thursday morning in early spring, when the air already smelled like wet earth and worms and the dogwoods were thinking about blooming, Linda set a white mug in front of him at the kitchen table and said, "We need a reset, Bob. Let's do a family trip to fix us. The mountains, a cabin, fresh air." Her voice was light, but her eyes stayed tight, as if she had practiced the sentence in another room. Bob wanted to believe in that word, fix. He pictured long blue ridges and clouds like sheep, and himself standing on a deck with a sweater on, smiling with Linda because they had remembered how. He said, "All right," and nodded slow so he would not sound like a man begging the world to be kind. Linda moved quickly after that, almost too quickly, calling the rental car company, the cabin place, the credit union, all in a brisk chain that reminded Bob of assembly line work. And when he tried to ask about dates, she said she had it handled and patted his shoulder as if he were the one who needed soothing. Their son, Mark, said he could come up Saturday night if nothing broke at the plant. Their daughter, Claire, said she might be able to drive up for Sunday lunch if her boss didn't change the schedule. And Bob heard the might and the if and told himself it would still be good. Just the two of them first, maybe even better, because at their age, sometimes company tired you more than the thing you were trying to escape. That afternoon, while taking folded sweaters from the dryer, Bob heard Linda in the laundry room with the door almost closed, her voice low and flat, and he caught only the end. "Friday? Yes. After lunch, I'll bring him." The words stuck to him like sawdust. When she came out and saw him standing there, she smiled too fast and said she was trying to get travel insurance to cover whatever, storms and such. And he nodded and told himself not to be an old fool who hears a creak and calls it a ghost. A week earlier, he had opened the desk drawer to find stamps and found a thin gray folder with his name on it, Whitaker, Robert. Preliminary cognitive screening, and the words had felt like cold water down his back. When he asked, Linda had said her friend from church knew a clinic that did free memory checks, like a blood pressure cart at the pharmacy. And Bob had said he didn't need a test to know his own name and address and the part number for the belt on his mower. But he let it go because arguing about paper is like arguing with a fence post. It does not move. The morning they left, the sky sat low and kind, and a light rain tapped the gutters. Bob put his toolbox back in the shed and tied a fresh tag on his suitcase because he liked his name written neat, then locked the back door and checked the stove even though he knew he had not used it. Linda came out in a crisp blue jacket and new walking shoes he had not seen before, and she took the keys from their hook and said she would drive because the rental had new bells and whistles, and she did not want him to fuss with them. He smiled and let her, because a marriage is a long building, and you don't pull out a beam every time it groans. They rolled down the street past Mrs. Patel's tulips, and the boy on the corner with the skateboard and the slow dog that always looked surprised to see daylight. Bob waved, because he always waved. On the interstate, Linda hummed old songs like she was trying to fill the space between them with something safe. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder, then again, and once she turned it face down with a small, quick motion that made Bob think of someone hiding a card too close to the chest. He watched the mile markers go by and let the wipers set a steady beat. For a while, the landscape felt like home. Wide fields, scrubby pines, billboards for peanuts and fireworks and Jesus. Then Linda took an exit he didn't expect. "Scenic route," she said before he could ask. "Less traffic, more pretty." He looked out and tried to see the pretty. He saw a narrow two-lane ribbon heading south, and a white church with a steeple like a pencil, and a closed feed store with letters fallen off the sign. He said nothing, because he did not want to be a man who turned every bend into a fight. After another 20 miles, they turned again, and the signs now mentioned towns he had visited only when someone died. South Boston, Danville, places that made the Blue Ridge feel like a suggestion instead of a plan. "We're going to the mountains?" he asked, very mild. "Of course," Linda said, as if he had asked something foolish. She turned up the radio a click. A few miles later, she took a call and spoke in a tone she used with the bank, light and polite and a little fake. She said, "Yes, we're on the way, after lunch." She glanced at Bob as if to check whether he had heard her, and then she added, softer, "Thank you for fitting us in." Bob stared out at a field gray with last year's corn stalks and tried to breathe in through his nose and out through his mouth, like the physical therapist had taught him when his knee was bad. He counted fence posts. He matched his breath to the clicks of the blinker when Linda changed lanes. He made a small promise to himself to pay attention without making a scene. The road narrowed where two ditches pinched in, and the air smelled like diesel and damp dirt. At a long light, he saw his reflection in the passenger window, the slope of his shoulders, the curve of his ear, the same man he had been yesterday and the day before that, and he said to his reflection in his head, "You are here, Bob. You are here." The light turned green. The car rolled forward. A sign ahead promised gas, food, clean restrooms in 3 miles, and Linda's fingers tapped the wheel the way they did when she was almost at the end of a task. "We'll stop up there," she said, bright and tidy, and he said, "All right," in the same even tone, and felt his heart settle and then pick up again, not with fear but with the clean, sharp feeling of a man who is about to use all the senses God gave him. The gas station sat just off the highway, like a bright square of light in the gray day, with a low red roof, 3 pumps, a tall sign that promised gas, food, clean restrooms, and a row of faded banners that clicked softly in the wind. Linda guided the rental SUV to the middle pump and killed the engine with a neat twist of her wrist, then kept both hands on the steering wheel for a second as if finishing a thought, and finally said, "Let's top off and stretch." Bob nodded, opened his door with the careful swing of someone who respected hinges, and stepped down onto the damp asphalt. He felt the little twinge in his right knee and told it to behave. Linda stayed by the pump, swiped the card, and set the handle. Her phone lit up in the cup holder. She picked it up, turned her shoulder away from him, and said, "Yes, we're here," in that bright, polite tone he had heard before. She added, "After lunch is fine," and her eyes flicked toward him and then away. Bob put his cap on, the one with the old school logo, and started toward the store doors that hissed open and closed with each customer. A young attendant in a navy shirt was wiping a windshield at the next pump, slim, sun-freckled, with careful eyes and a name patch that read J. As Bob passed, the young man leaned as if to wring water from his rag and, in the same motion, pressed something small and folded into Bob's palm, saying in a low voice that did not match his cheerful posture, "Sir, you dropped this." Bob kept walking because his body knew that was the right play when you do not yet know the rules. Inside, the cool air smelled like coffee and cleaner and warm corn dogs under a heat lamp. He stood by a rack of peanuts and jerky, unfurled the folded paper with his workman's hands, and saw in hard block letters dug deep into the thin receipt, "Run now." His pulse jumped once, hard, and then steadied the way it used to when a lathe caught, and he had to decide whether to shut it down or lean in and guide the cut. He looked up through the glass and saw Linda at the pump, talking again into her phone, her mouth covered by her hand like she was blocking a draft. He folded the note small, slid it into the coin pocket of his jeans, lifted a bottle of water from the cooler, and took it to the register. The clerk scanned it without looking up. Bob paid in cash to keep his hands busy. He turned toward the back, where a sign with a blue arrow read, "Restrooms." As he reached for the door, the same young attendant appeared by the chip display as if he had drifted there by accident and said very softly, eyes steady on Bob's, "Bathroom's out of order, sir. This way, please." He did not touch Bob. He just tipped his chin toward a short hallway stacked with cartons of soda and walked, slow enough to be followed, fast enough to mean it. Bob felt his heart counting each step. They slipped into a narrow service corridor that smelled like cardboard and sugar, and at the end was a metal door with a push bar that opened to a strip of gravel behind the store, dumpsters to the left, a shallow ditch to the right. The highway hummed louder out here. The young man let the door close behind them and spoke first. "My name's Jay," he said, his voice shaking a little but holding. "I don't want trouble. I just couldn't let it happen. She was here last week with a man. Tall, blonde, expensive watch. They stood by the coffee pots. I was stocking lids. I heard her say, 'Friday after lunch, the intake is ready.' He gets agitated. 'Will you handle the paperwork?' And the man said, 'Once he's in, we control everything.'" The words landed one by one, heavy and simple, and Bob felt the same cold that had run down his back when he first saw that gray folder in the desk. "Intake," Bob repeated, like he was running his finger along a cut to feel if it was deep. Jay nodded. "A memory place," he said. "South of here. I didn't catch the name. The man called it the Center. He told her to keep you calm and tired." Bob looked at the gravel at his feet and saw the small, sharp stones like the grit you toss on slick steps. He saw, too, the way Linda had smiled too fast, the way she had taken a scenic road south, the way she had said after lunch twice. "Why tell me?" he asked, his voice low, not unkind. Jay swallowed. "Because they came again this morning," he said. "She pumped gas. He parked over there by the dumpsters. She said, 'We're 30 minutes out.' He said, 'I'll be waiting by the side entrance.' I thought maybe I was crazy last week, but not today. I wrote the note before you got out of the car. I figured if I tried to say it in front of her, she'd shut me down. I don't know you, sir, but if this was my granddad, I'd want someone to speak up." Through the thin door, Bob heard the pump click off and Linda's distant voice say something he could not make out, and he realized he had been holding his breath. He let it out slow. "I'm going to the bathroom," he said, practicing the sentence in a plain, even tone. Jay nodded once and pushed the door open just enough for Bob to step back into the bright aisle near the coolers. Bob walked to the front as if nothing had been said, past the chips and the scratch-off tickets and the cardboard stand selling travel pillows. He could see Linda through the glass now, tapping her phone, scanning the lot. He lifted his hand and called, "I'm going to the bathroom," making sure his voice carried in just the right everyday way. Linda waved without a smile and turned to fit the nozzle back in its cradle, her head bent, her shoulders tight. Bob turned the corner again and slipped back into the hallway. Jay was waiting with a set jaw. "There's a side gate that opens to the road," Jay said. "My truck is there. I can take you to the sheriff, 5 minutes tops. They'll know what to do." Bob stared at him and saw a boy who had decided to be brave in a world that did not always reward that, and he felt something inside him. A schoolteacher's old instinct. Trust that kind of courage. "She will look for me," Bob said. "She will call my name." Jay nodded. "Then we should go now." They moved down the corridor, pushed through the back door, and turned along the dumpsters to a chain-link gate that stuck at the bottom before it gave with a scrape. Beyond, a short side road ran parallel to the highway, and a beat-up blue pickup idled there with its blinker on. Bob hesitated for a heartbeat, not because he doubted Jay, but because he had spent a lifetime being the man who did the careful, decent thing, and leaving your wife at a gas pump without a word felt like stepping off the known map. Then he remembered the gray folder boxes checked in a neat hand that was not his, the words, "We control everything," the turned roads, the hidden phone calls, and the way Linda had said after lunch like a key that fit a lock he could not see, and his doubt blew out like a match in wind. From the front lot came Linda's voice, sharper now. "Bob?" It carried over the roof and into the alley like a string tugging at him. He did not answer. He met Jay's eyes, saw the fear and the resolve, and said, "All right." They reached the truck. Jay opened the passenger door. Bob put one foot on the step and then the other, feeling each move like a man testing a ladder before climbing, and settled onto the cracked vinyl seat with his bottle of water cold in his hand and the folded note hot in his pocket. He looked once in the side mirror and saw the white rental SUV, the pump, the flags clicking, and the space where he had stood a minute before. He did not see Linda's face, only the top of her head as she turned, searching. Jay put the truck in gear. The tires crunched the gravel. The gate rattled shut behind them with a small metal clap. Bob felt the truck nose toward the road and understood in a clear, simple way that this was the line between the life he had been led toward and the life he would choose for himself. He did not look back again. He held the water, he steadied his breathing, and as the truck rolled forward, he knew, as cleanly as a man knows which way is level, that he was not getting back in that car. Jay eased the blue pickup onto the side road and then onto the highway, and Bob sat very still with the bottle of water cold in his hand and the folded receipt burning in his pocket, feeling the truck hum under him like a steady animal. The wipers squeaked once and then rested as the rain thinned to a mist, and the young man glanced over only long enough to say, "5 minutes to the sheriff," in a low voice that sounded both nervous and sure. Bob nodded because his mouth felt dry, and he did not trust it yet. He looked in the side mirror and saw only gray sky and a ribbon of asphalt opening ahead. They passed a feed store, a towing lot with 3 old wrecks, and a church with a sign that read, "God knows the way home." And then the brick building with a flagpole came into view, neat and square, with a row of parking spaces marked visitor. Jay pulled in, cut the engine, and turned to Bob. "I can come in and tell them what I heard," he said, voice shaking a little, "but if you'd rather I just drop you." Bob put his big hand on the boy's forearm for a second, the way a shop teacher steadies a new student at the saw, and said, "You got me here. Let's finish it right." Inside, the air was cooler and smelled faintly of coffee and copier toner. A woman with silver hair behind the front desk looked up, alert, not annoyed. Her name tag read Deputy Marsh. "How can I help you?" she asked, not in a lazy way, but like she meant the words. Bob took a breath and said, "My name is Robert Whitaker. I believe my wife is trying to take me somewhere I don't agree to. This young man heard her speak to someone about intake and paperwork. I have this note." He unfolded the receipt with its rough printing and slid it across the counter. Deputy Marsh read it once, then looked at Bob for a long second, studying his face, not doubting, just checking that she saw the whole person. "Let's step back to a quiet room," she said. She buzzed a door, led them down a short hall into a small interview room with 2 chairs, a table, and a box of tissues. She offered water, which Bob did not take because he still had the bottle Jay had bought with his own money. She turned on a small recorder and said, "For the record, please state your name and date of birth." Bob did, steady and clear. Then he added his address, the name of his street, the nearest cross street, and even his old school's phone number, which surprised him but felt like proof of a brain that still held. She asked what had happened in order, and Bob told it plain. The talk of a fix-us trip, the scenic turns, the phone calls with after lunch, the gas station, the note, the words intake and we control everything, the side gate, the quick choice. He did not add any extra color because he had been a shop teacher long enough to know that extra color can hide the cut line. When he finished, Deputy Marsh asked Jay to speak. Jay stared at his hands, then at the wall just above Bob's shoulder, and explained how he had seen Linda last week with a tall blonde man who wore an expensive watch, how he had heard Friday after lunch and intake, how the man had said, "We control everything," and how that same man had sat across the lot that morning while Linda pumped gas and talked on her phone. "I wrote the note in case he didn't go inside alone," Jay said, tapping the table near the receipt with a bitten fingernail. "I figured a note was the only way if she stayed by him." Deputy Marsh asked a few short questions. Did he know the clinic name? No. Did he hear a town? No. Did he see a plate on the man's car? Jay thought, then shook his head. "It was a gray sedan," he said, embarrassed. "That's all I remember." She turned to Bob. "Mr. Whitaker, do you feel safe going home right now?" Bob thought of the porch he had built and the way his house held his steps like a friend, and then he thought of a key turning in a lock that someone else had copied without his say. "Not alone," he said. "I don't think I should open that door first." "Good answer," she said. She asked for his phone. He handed it over. It buzzed in her palm and flashed Linda's name. She put it on silent and set it face down. "We're not going to destroy your phone," she said, a small smile, "but let's give you some quiet." She took down his daughter Claire's number and his neighbor Mrs. Patel's number while Bob recited them without looking at any list. She called both. To Claire, she said, "Your father is safe with us. Can you come here?" And Claire said she was leaving right now and needed the address, her voice quick and tight over the line. To Mrs. Patel, she said, "Please do not release any spare keys or papers to anyone. If you see a gray sedan cruising the block, call us." Then she walked down the hall and came back with a stack of simple forms. "Here is what we can do right away," she said, laying them out like plans on a workbench. "We can take a statement from both of you. We can file an incident report for suspected attempted exploitation of an elder. We can fax a request to the magistrate for an emergency protective order that says no one can transport you anywhere or sign documents on your behalf without your written, witnessed consent. We also recommend you speak with a lawyer today about freezing joint accounts and checking whether any documents were filed in your name. Do you understand all this?" Bob nodded, and then, because old men sometimes use humor to check that they are still themselves, he said, "I used to teach kids how to read a tape measure." She smiled for real. "Then these will be easy." While they filled out the forms, Bob's phone buzzed and stopped. Once the caller ID said Linda. Once it said unknown. Once it said Mark, his son. He looked at Deputy Marsh. "Should I pick up?" "Not alone," she said again, steady as a level. "If you want to return any call, do it on speaker with me sitting right here." "Not yet," Bob said quietly. He signed where she asked him to sign. He wrote the date in firm block numbers, 04, and paused because he still liked to get the month right, then finished it with a small satisfied nod. Jay wrote his statement in a careful print that showed he wanted the letters to behave. When he finished, he let out a breath he might not have known he was holding. "You can go if you need to," Bob told him. "I can take it from here." Jay shook his head. "I'll wait until your daughter gets here," he said, as if that part had already been decided in him before he even heard the question. Deputy Marsh left to fax the forms and make a call to the magistrate. The room fell quiet. Bob heard the building hum and the muffled radio from another office. He took the folded note from his pocket and flattened it on the table with his palm, as if smoothing a plan across a slab of wood. And he thought about all the times he had told students to trust the measurements, not the guesses. To check twice, cut once, to keep their fingers clear of a blade. His phone buzzed again, and this time showed a text from Linda. "Where are you? This isn't safe for you. Please answer." He felt something like a small ache in his chest, and then let it pass. He slid the phone farther away. When Deputy Marsh returned, she said, "The magistrate granted the emergency order. It's temporary, but it gives us a shield. We'll serve notice to your wife. Do you have a place to stay for a day or two besides your house?" "My daughter will take me," Bob said. "If she hits traffic, I can sit here." "You can sit here as long as you like," the deputy said. She opened a drawer and set a small spiral notepad on the table. "I like people to write things down on days like this," she said. "It makes the day real. If anyone tells you later you were confused, you can wave paper." Bob smiled at that. He wrote the date once more, then the time, then a simple sentence. "Jay warned me." I walked away. "Claire is coming." He capped the pen and sat back. 25 minutes later, he heard footsteps quick on tile and a woman's voice saying, "My dad, Bob Whitaker, where is he?" And then Claire stood in the doorway with her coat half-zipped and her eyes already full. She hugged him so hard his ribs creaked. "I'm okay," he said into her hair. "I'm here." He turned to Jay. "This is the young man who spoke up." Claire wiped her face and shook Jay's hand with both of hers. "Thank you," she said, and then, because simple words were the only ones that fit the day, she said it again. Deputy Marsh pulled up 2 more chairs and began to go over next steps in a calm, careful order. Change locks, call a lawyer today, keep the phone quiet, do not meet Linda alone, Do not sign anything, and think about a private investigator to map out what had been set in motion. Bob listened and felt each instruction land like a screw set home. He felt the fear in him stop racing and begin to settle into something he recognized from a lifetime at a workbench: focus. He was an old man, yes, but he was still a man who could build straight, and now he knew which way level was. Claire drove her father from the sheriff's office with both hands tight on the wheel, and her jaw set in a way that reminded Bob of her mother when bills were due. And Deputy Marsh followed behind them in a cruiser for safety. Lights off, steady as a shadow. The sky had lifted to a pale silver, and the dogwoods along their street were just beginning to show white tips. And when they pulled up to the small brick house, Bob sat for a second with his palm on his thigh to feel the quiet thrum of his own pulse and to tell himself he was home by choice, not because anyone pushed him there. Claire took his keys, met the deputy's eye, and said, "We go in together." And they did, slow and practical, like people entering a workshop where a saw might still be spinning. The living room smelled like lemon cleaner and the last coffee Linda had brewed that morning, and the throw on the sofa sat too straight, which made Bob think of a staged picture, not a life. Deputy Marsh asked, in that soft, firm way she had, whether there were weapons in the house, and Bob said only the old nail gun and a broken BB rifle in the shed. So she nodded and stood near the door while Claire walked with her father to the study, where the desk looked just as he had left it, except for one detail. The thin gray folder lay not tucked away in the drawer where he had seen it last week, but flat on the blotter like a place setting. Bob looked at it as a man looks at a board he suspects is warped. He opened it with 2 fingers and read his own name again. Whitaker, Robert. Preliminary cognitive screening. And the boxes checked in a careful hand that was not his. Forgets appointments. Becomes disoriented. Wanders at night. Then a signature at the bottom. S. Hayes, M.D. And a date that matched the afternoon Linda had said she was running to the credit union. Claire took a photo of each page with her phone, steady, careful, like evidence in a school science fair. Then she called the attorney that Deputy Marsh had mentioned, a woman named Miss Alvarez, and put her on speaker. Miss Alvarez's voice was calm and clear. "First, do not be alone with your wife," she said. "Second, we will freeze joint accounts today. Third, change the locks before sundown. I will file a notice with the court and the banks and start a check for any powers of attorney filed without consent. Do you see any other paperwork? Wills, deeds, medical directives? Pulled from their normal place?" Bob opened the bottom drawer where he kept his will and the deed copy wrapped in a rubber band. The band was snapped, and the papers were in a different order, as if someone had flipped through them and set them back without the same respect for edges he had. He said so, and Miss Alvarez said, "Photograph everything. I'm emailing a list of banks and offices to alert. Deputy, if you're still there, please serve the temporary protective order as soon as you can locate the spouse." "Already in motion," Deputy Marsh said from the doorway, hand to her radio. While Claire photographed, Bob wrote the date and time in the small spiral notebook the deputy had given him, and he wrote one plain sentence. "Opened folder on desk, not in drawer," and found the act of writing calmed him like planning a rough plank smooth. The phone on the kitchen counter started to buzz, and Bob recognized the pattern of Linda's ringtone as if it were a bird he knew from the yard. He did not move toward it. "Let it go to voicemail," Miss Alvarez said. "Anything she says should be recorded, not debated." They walked the house together then, room by room, Claire in front, Bob behind, the deputy last, and saw small signs that were heavy when you stacked them. An overnight bag missing from the closet where they kept luggage. A manila envelope on the hall table with Bob's name half written in pencil and then erased. The laundry basket empty, though Bob had put a load in that morning. The back door key not on its hook. "She planned motion," Miss Alvarez said when they reported each thing. "She needs him tired, confused, and mobile. We will shut every gate in her path." She texted a locksmith's number and stayed on the line while Claire booked him for the afternoon. "I'll be here in an hour," the man said flatly. Like bad weather he knew how to work in. Mrs. Patel came to the porch when she saw the cruiser and put a hand to her chest when she realized Bob was fine. She stood with them and said she had seen a gray sedan drive the block twice at midday the day before and pause at the corner, the driver wearing sunglasses, though the sky was cloudy. "Call if you see it again," Deputy Marsh said, giving her a card. Bob felt the weight of the house shift inside him, from something under threat to something defended, and that feeling was so new he almost did not trust it. He made coffee because he knew how, because he wanted in his own small way to prove he still did normal things, and the smell of it filled the kitchen like a familiar song. Claire put 2 mugs on the table, set up her laptop, and opened her banking app. "Dad, do you see charges you don't know?" she asked, turning the screen so he could read it. He leaned forward and traced a finger along the line items, and one stood out, a payment to a place he did not recognize with a bland name, Rivercare Transitions LLC. He did not say a word, he just pointed, and Miss Alvarez, still on speaker, said, "Take a screenshot. That's likely the intake coordinator's shell company. We'll subpoena records if needed." The locksmith, a short man with kind eyes and a tool belt that clinked, arrived as promised, and Bob watched him work the deadbolts with neat turns, admired the way the man kept his screws in a tidy tin, little order inside a big mess. "Code's changed," the locksmith said when he finished. "Give the new keys only to people you trust. No copies at hardware stores. Call me direct." Claire slid a key into Bob's palm and closed his fingers over it like a promise. The cruiser idled at the curb while Deputy Marsh stepped away to take a call. When she came back, her mouth was a thin line. "The protective order is served," she said. "Your wife was not at the gas station when a unit went by, but we have contact. She texted back that she's concerned for your safety and wants to help you get stabilized. Do not respond." As if summoned by the word, a car pulled up across the street, not the gray sedan, but Linda's own navy sedan, and Linda got out fast, hair neat, jacket zipped, eyes bright and unreadable. She stepped toward the porch with a careful smile that showed no teeth and said, "Bob, sweetheart, this is silly. You disappeared. I was worried sick. We're going to be late for our reservation." Claire moved to the top step and did not step aside. "Mom," she said, and the word came out steady but tired, "you need to leave. There's an order. You can call your lawyer." Linda's eyes flicked to the cruiser, then to the locksmith box by the door, then to the gray folder on the hallway table, because Claire had put it there on purpose. For one breath, her face emptied, the way a light goes out when the power trips, and then she filled it again with a soft shake of the head. "He's confused," she said to the deputy. "He's been forgetting things." "I remember everything that matters," Bob said from behind Claire, and his voice surprised him with its strength, not because he shouted, but because it was level and sure, like a beam that has no give. Deputy Marsh stepped forward, one hand open, one resting near her belt, and said, "Ma'am, you've been served an order. You need to step off the property. Contact through counsel only." For a long second, no one moved. The wind shifted. A dog barked once 2 houses down. Then Linda turned without another word, walked back to her car, and sat behind the wheel with both hands at 10 and 2. She did not drive off right away, as if waiting for someone else to appear in her mirror, and when no one did, she pulled away slow and deliberate and was gone. The house felt bigger when the car turned the corner. Miss Alvarez's voice came through the speaker again, steady as ever. "Good," she said. "We keep going. I'll file asset freeze motions before close of business. I'll engage a licensed investigator to check the clinic, the coordinator, and any accounts in your name. Tonight, eat, sleep, keep doors locked. Tomorrow we make a plan for the week. Mr. Whitaker, please write down how you feel right now." Bob took the notebook, dated the page, and wrote, "My house is mine. My mind is mine." Then he looked up at Claire, at the deputy, at the locksmith putting tools back in neat order, and he felt something small and bright settle under his ribs. Not victory, not yet, but a clean line to follow, a simple truth a man could build from. By morning, the house felt like a work site, with a plan tacked to the wall, and Bob moved through it with Claire and Miss Alvarez the way a foreman walks a crew, slow, careful, checking each step before the next. While a patrol car idled down the block at intervals, and Mrs. Patel watched from her porch with a thermos of tea like a sentry. Miss Alvarez arrived in person with a calm paralegal and a portable scanner, spread folders across the kitchen table, and began to build a paper fence around Bob's life. Account freezes, alerts to banks, notices to the DMV and the Registrar of Deeds, a formal letter to the Rivercare Transitions LLC charge disputing it as unauthorized, and a faxed copy of the emergency protective order to a list of clinics within 50 miles of Danville. At 10 o'clock, a private investigator named Rowan knocked, a quiet man in a brown jacket who set his laptop down and spoke in clean lines. He had pulled the LLC records for Rivercare and found the owner to be a Richard Nolan of a rented suite in Martinsville. He had canvassed gas stations within a 5-mile radius of the stop and obtained the manager's permission to pull exterior camera footage. He slid a paused frame across the screen for Bob to see. Linda at the pump last week, head bent toward a tall blonde man in a gray sedan, that the man's face turned just enough to catch the small flash of a metal watch at his cuff. "We'll copy this to 3 places," Rowan said, already plugging in a thumb drive. "The clinic is likely the Blue Ridge Memory and Wellness Center on the south side of Danville. Their intake coordinator is listed as Rick Nolan on a brochure archived online. Same man." He lifted another sheet, a scan of an email found on a hidden account that Rowan had recovered from the shared tablet's mail app, linda.rhomepluscare@gmail. Messages that used phrases like, "after placement," "he signs better when tired," and "please confirm side entrance," and one with a PDF titled POA template.pdf. Claire's jaw tightened as she read. Miss Alvarez's voice stayed even. "We'll preserve the metadata and prepare an affidavit. Mr. Whitaker, are these your words anywhere?" Bob shook his head once. He touched the gray folder again where it sat on the table and said, "My words are in my notebook." Rowan nodded as if that mattered to him too. He had also pulled a public docket search and found a guardianship hearing request, drafted but not yet filed in a neighboring county, Halifax, where neither Linda nor Bob lived, a dodge common to people who wanted a judge who did not know the family. It lists advanced dementia indicators, pulled from Dr. S. Hayes' screening, Rowan said, tapping the printed page, and asks for ex parte temporary control. If filed, it could move fast. Ms. Alvarez was already calling the clerk's office to place a note of contest on any filing mentioning Bob's name, her paralegal whispering dates and case numbers as she typed. At 11, Deputy Marsh came by with copies of the served order and a reply from the clinic, a bland email that said they respect all protective actions, and had no scheduled admission today for a Robert Whitaker, followed 5 minutes later by a second email Rowan pulled through the hidden account, a confirmation to Linda for a 1:30 p.m. family consult at side entrance with R. Nolan. Ms. Alvarez looked up once and said, "There is their first lie." She forwarded both to the Commonwealth's attorney with a summary line. Conflict of statements by medical vendor. Attempted admission under disputed consent. Refer for investigation. Claire kept a steady pace at the table, calling banks to add fraud watch, changing passwords, and making a neat list of every autopay and bill so nothing in Bob's life would get shut off while they fought. Because she knew one of the small cruelties of schemes like this was to make a person feel incompetent by letting the lights go dark. Around noon, the doorbell rang. It was Mark, their son, shoulders hunched, eyes unsure, smelling like machine oil from the plant. He looked from his father to his sister to the deputy's card on the counter. "Mom says Dad is unstable," he said in a low voice. "She says a doctor confirmed he wanders at night." Bob did not argue. He opened his little spiral and slid it across. On the first page, Mark saw dates, times, crisp lines. 09:15. Sheriff's Office. 10:05. Alvarez here. 10:40. Rowan evidence. And a line in Bob's old shop teacher's hand. "I walked away when warned." Claire kept her voice gentle. She opened the gray folder and the email scan and the picture of Linda with the man, and let Mark look until he stopped defending what he had been told and started to read what was in front of him. He sat hard at the table. "I didn't know," he said, and he put both hands on his head like a man with a headache. "She said it was love." Bob put a hand on his son's shoulder and squeezed once, not to forgive everything in a single squeeze, but to mark the moment the boy turned toward truth. Rowan's phone buzzed. The gas station manager had found interior audio on a camera near the coffee pots. No clean voices, but enough fragments to match Jay's account. After lunch, intake, side entrance, paperwork, and the man's lower register saying, "We'll control," before a milk steamer hissed. We'll clean it and produce a transcript, Rowan said, already sending it to a forensic audio tech. Ms. Alvarez reached Dr. Hayes' clinic and put him on speaker. "Doctor," she said, "this is Attorney Alvarez representing Mr. Whitaker. We are preserving all records. We have an order in place. Do not accept any admission requests from anyone in his name without court-verified consent. Also, any documents signed by Robert Whitaker in the last 30 days should be delivered to my office by close of business." There was a long pause, then a careful voice. "We comply with all laws." "Good," Miss Alvarez said. "Start now." When she ended the call, Claire's laptop chimed. A new email had landed in Linda's hidden account from Rick Nolan with the subject "Today's Plan," outlining a 1:20 meet, a side door, a calming dose prescribed in advance by SH to reduce agitation, and a final line, "Once we have the POA in place, funds move within the week." No one spoke for a few heartbeats. Then Deputy Marsh said quietly, "That line saves a lot of breath." She photographed the screen and sent it to her detective unit with a note. "Probable cause for attempted financial exploitation. Request review." At 1:15, a gray sedan crept past the end of the block and paused. Mrs. Patel, bless her, stepped to the curb and looked straight at it with her phone raised like a lighthouse, and the car rolled on. Bob watched from the window with the feeling of a man who has braced a door and can hear someone test the knob from outside. He did not hide. He stood straight and let his heart beat. The clock moved. At 1:30, Rowan's contact at the clinic texted a single word, "No-show," which meant Linda and the man had driven somewhere and waited for a door that did not open for them. Miss Alvarez took advantage of the short window and filed an emergency motion for a declaratory judgment, confirming Bob's full capacity and voiding any powers of attorney procured under misrepresentation, along with a petition to freeze the Rivercare account and a referral packet to the Commonwealth's attorney, attaching the emails, the bank charges, the folder, and the audio note. "We'll be in front of a judge within the week," she said, "sooner if the court has a late docket." Mark stood and asked what he could do that was not just standing there feeling ashamed. Claire put him to work. "Call the plant to say he would be out tomorrow. Drive to the post office to place a hold on any change of address forms filed in their father's name. Pull copies of the last 12 months of statements from the credit union and change the code on the garage keypad." He did each task with his hands fast and his eyes down, learning the shape of repair. Near 3 o'clock, the unknown number calls slowed, then stopped. Linda's last text said only, "I tried to save you," which was a sentence that used the right letters and still meant the wrong thing. Bob wrote it in his notebook exactly as it came, to keep the record of what people say when they feel the walls of truth press in. The house grew quiet again. Not the fearful quiet of waiting for a doorbell, but the steady quiet of a place that has been measured and squared. Rain began to tick the gutters and then pulled back to mist. Rowan packed his laptop and said he would drive to Danville in the morning to pull more records and to the Martinsville suite to photograph the directory listing for Rivercare. Miss Alvarez gathered signatures in blue ink, shook Bob's hand, and said, "You did the hard thing already when you walked away. Now we keep the line straight." After they left, Bob and his children ate soup at the kitchen table because soup is good after any storm. Before he went to bed, Bob stood in the hallway and looked at the porch swing across the dark, and he felt the simple fact of it. He had hung it level, and it stayed level. And that is what good work does. He wrote one more line in his notebook before the day ended. "We shut the side door they plan to use. Tomorrow we stand in the open one on our own." The hearing came faster than anyone expected, set for Thursday morning in a small courtroom on the second floor of the county building. And Bob arrived early in his best jacket with his boots polished, carrying the small spiral notebook in his pocket like a tool he trusted, while Claire walked beside him with a folder under her arm, and Mark trailed a step behind, quiet and watchful. Ms. Alvarez met them at the door with a steady nod and said, "We will go step by step." And they took seats at the front table where the wood was nicked by years of elbows and pens. And Bob looked up at the state seal on the wall and breathed slow until the room felt level under his feet. The judge was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a calm voice, Judge Kincaid, who began by saying she had read the emergency filings and would hear short testimony on two issues: whether Robert Whitaker retained his decision-making rights and whether temporary orders should remain to protect his property. She added that any evidence of attempted financial exploitation would be referred to the Commonwealth's attorney. Linda entered with a lawyer in a tight gray suit and sat at the other table without looking at Bob. Her hands were folded, her face smooth, her mouth set as if she had rehearsed one expression. The clerk swore everyone in, and Miss Alvarez called Bob first because she wanted the judge to hear him before she heard about him. Bob stood straight at the witness stand and answered each question in simple words: his name, his address, his birthday, the highway they had taken, the words after lunch, the gas station, the note that said "run now," the side door, the sheriff's office, the notebook where he wrote the date and time, the locksmith, the bank, the emails he did not write. He did not talk in circles. He spoke like a man who has planed many boards and knows when they are true. When Miss Alvarez asked what day it was and who the president was and where his daughter worked, he answered without hurry. And when she asked what he did the day before, he picked up his notebook, asked the judge if he could read one line, and read, "We shut the side door they plan to use," and then looked up and added, "I sleep in my own bed, Your Honor, and I wake and make coffee, and I know where the mugs go." The judge nodded once and made a note. Linda's lawyer stood to cross-examine and tried to pull Bob into fog. "Mr. Whitaker, do you ever forget where you put your keys?" Bob said yes sometimes, and so did every person he had ever known. "Do you ever wake at night?" "Yes, to use the bathroom, like men his age do." "Did you take any medicine on the day in question?" "Tylenol for his knee." The lawyer showed the thin gray folder and asked if Bob had seen it before the trip. Bob said yes, he had, and he had asked his wife about it, and she had called it a simple screening like a blood pressure check, though it was marked the other way. "So you knew," the lawyer said, as if this trapped him. "I knew a piece of paper existed with boxes checked that are not my life," Bob answered, steady. Miss Alvarez called Jay next, and the young man came in wearing a borrowed tie that he kept smoothing as if it itched. He sat down, swallowed, and told the story the way he had told it in the sheriff's office. The two visits at the gas station, the man with the watch, the words intake and side entrance. The sentence, "Once he's in, we control everything," and the note he had written because he thought it might be the only safe way to speak. Linda's lawyer tried to rattle him by asking about makes and models and license plates, and Jay shook his head and said he did not know cars like that. He knew what people said when they thought a clerk wasn't listening. Ms. Alvarez then called Rowan, who moved like a man who disliked wasting words. He confirmed the LLC records for River Care Transitions, the brochure for the Blue Ridge Memory and Wellness Center, listing R. Nolan as intake, the hidden email account recovered from a shared tablet, the message with today's plan, and the line calming dose, the bank charge to River Care, and the draft guardianship petition prepared for the wrong county with phrases copied from Dr. Hayes' checkboxes. He handed up printed exhibits in plastic sleeves and explained each one like a blueprint. Here is the ledger, here is the path, here is the load-bearing point. Miss Alvarez played a short, cleaned clip from the gas station's coffee bar camera, a hiss of steam, then fragments that matched Jay's memory. After lunch, side entrance, paperwork, will control, before the sound cut. The judge listened without visible change to her face and wrote again. Deputy Marsh testified last on that side, short and firm. The report intake, the call to the magistrate, the protective order, the service of that order, the instruction to hold keys and keep Bob safe. Then it was Linda's turn. Her lawyer called her, and she walked to the stand with her chin high, and her voice trembled just enough to look like concern as she said she loved her husband, and he had been forgetful. He had left the stove on once. He had called Mark by the wrong name, and the clinic visit was to help him adjust, so he would not be afraid. Miss Alvarez asked the judge to let her question with exhibits in hand. She handed Linda the email titled Today's Plan and asked, "Did you write this?" Linda stared at it for a long second and said she had typed some parts and forwarded other parts because Rick handled details. "Who is Rick?" Miss Alvarez asked. "A coordinator," Linda said. "For what?" "For the wellness center. Is the calming dose your idea? Linda glanced at her lawyer and said it was suggested by SH. Is that Dr. Hayes? Yes. And what did you plan to do after the side entrance meeting? Linda said, very soft. We were going to stabilize him. Miss Alvarez's voice stayed gentle. And then move his assets? Linda did not answer. Miss Alvarez held up the Rivercare charge and the draft guardianship petition for Halifax County and asked why Linda would file in a county where they did not live, and Linda said she had been told it was faster there. By whom? Rick, she said again, and it sounded smaller each time. Dr. Hayes appeared by subpoena on a video screen, a man in a white coat in a bland office. He tried to say the screening was informal, but his signature sat beside the checked boxes like nails. And when Ms. Alvarez asked whether he had examined Bob in person, he admitted he had not. He had relied on spousal report. Did you prescribe a calming dose in advance of an intake? Ms. Alvarez asked. He shifted and said he discussed options. The judge leaned forward then. Doctor, she said, voice even, do you understand that you are describing a path to remove a man's freedom based on one person's story and a piece of paper? He said he complied with all laws. Not today you don't, Judge Kincaid said and made another note. When both sides finished, the judge spoke without drama. She found that Robert Whitaker retained full capacity, that he had been the target of an organized attempt to move him and take control of his property under color of care, that the emergency protective order would be extended and expanded, that any power of attorney naming Linda would be voided for cause, that all financial institutions would freeze any account touched by Rivercare Transitions LLC, that the clinic and Dr. Hayes would produce records, that the draft guardianship petition would be flagged and dismissed if filed, and that the file would be referred to the Commonwealth's attorney for investigation of attempted financial exploitation, conspiracy, forgery, and any other related offense. She looked at Bob last and said, Sir, thank you for walking into a station and asking for help. The court recognizes your voice. Then she looked at Linda and said, Ma'am, get counsel who will talk to you about consequences. The gavel came down once, a small, hard sound like a clean cut on dry wood. Outside the courtroom, the hallway smelled like floor wax and relief. Miss Alvarez squeezed Bob's shoulder and told him the clerk would issue certified copies within the hour. Deputy Marsh shook his hand and said the detective unit would be in touch. Jay stood near the elevator, pulling at his tie, and Bob walked over and put his palm against the boy's shoulder again and said, You did good work. Mark said he was sorry, and Bob said they would not spend the rest of their lives in apology. They would spend them in repair. Claire handed her father a pen, and he opened the little notebook and wrote the date, the time, and one sentence. The judge heard me. The rest can be built. In the weeks after the hearing, life did not snap back all at once for Bob. It settled the way a pond calms after thrown stone, circles spreading out until the surface looks even again, and he kept his days simple so his head could follow his feet. Coffee first, write the date in his small spiral, a slow walk to loosen the knee, one task at a time on a yellow pad, Claire taped to the fridge so nothing important slid off the edge. Miss Alvarez called 2 days later to say the court clerk had issued certified copies of the order, and the banks had frozen any account touched by Rivercare. And Rowan sent a short message with a photo of the directory at a Martinsville office park where R. Nolan, Rivercare Transitions, sat on a plastic strip between a tax prep shop and a nail salon. The Commonwealth's attorney filed charges against Rick Nolan and the clinic for attempted financial exploitation and conspiracy, and Dr. Hayes received a notice from the medical board to appear, and Bob read each update in a chair by the window with the same careful attention he gave to a new tool. Learn what it does. Do not rush. After one quiet week, he told Claire he wanted to sell the brick house with the dogwoods because the rooms felt like a place where a bad plan had almost happened. And he did not want to keep listening for footsteps that were no longer coming. They called a realtor who walked the rooms with a clipboard and admired the level porch swing. And Bob agreed to leave the swing where it hung because the young couple who made an offer smiled hard when they touched it. And he liked the idea of something solid carrying forward for someone else. He built 2 simple crates from scrap plywood for his books and his hand planes, labeled each box with thick black numbers, cleared the workbench until it showed clean pine again, and let the movers take the heavy things while he drove his own car with a neat list of what was inside. Quilt, photo albums, 3 coffee mugs, 1 small wooden box with rubber bands around it where he kept the folded receipt that said, "Run now." He moved to a 1-story rental cottage near the Piankatank River where the air smelled faintly of salt and marsh grass. And the first thing he did was sit on the small back step and breathe until he could hear only the regular sounds. Cicadas in the late afternoon, a boat engine far off, an osprey calling from the light pole. And then he unpacked a mug and made coffee and arranged the spoons in the drawer in the way he liked. Handles to the left, bowls to the right. He set up a simple routine that made sense to him and would make sense to anyone who looked in his notebook. Mornings, he walked down to the dock with a hat on and watched the water lift and fall like slow breathing. Late mornings, he volunteered shelving at the town library, where the librarian, Mrs. Vaughan, had strong glasses and a soft voice and treated him like a colleague from the first day. Afternoons, he fixed small things at the cottage that the landlord never got to. Tightened a loose hinge on the screen door, oiled a sticky lock, patched a spot of soft floor with a square of new wood that he sanded until his hand could not tell the difference between old and new unless it thought about it. On Wednesdays, he went to the community center for a support group where people with quiet voices sat in a circle on metal chairs and told the plain truth about schemes that had almost taken their lives sideways. For the first 2 meetings, he just listened, hands folded. Then one afternoon, a man his age with a cap that said Korean War vet said his son kept suggesting a trial weekend at a facility to give mom a break. And Bob cleared his throat and said, "Write the date. Say what you see. To take a copy of anything they want you to sign and walk it into the sheriff's office." And he told his story in short lines without adding drama, and the man nodded slow and wrote down the word sheriff like it was a new tool he could trust. Claire visited every weekend at first, bringing a sack of groceries and pictures her little boy had drawn of a fish with a big grin. She checked the mailbox and sorted the last of the bills with her careful hands, then made dinner in his small kitchen while they talked through next steps. Final sale paperwork, change of address confirmations, a court date that might come in a month for the criminal case. And then they went outside with plates and watched the river take the last light. And Claire would say, "You sound like you again." And Bob would answer, "I always was. I just needed quiet to hear it." Mark came on a Tuesday with a new keypad for the cottage door and a set of window locks. He did not say many words, but he worked steady and then sat on the step with his father and said he had called Mom and told her he would not be part of any plan that moved his father like a crate, and that he would talk to her lawyer if needed. And Bob put a hand on his son's shoulder once and said, "We fix from here." A postcard arrived from South Hill with a picture of a mountain lake and printing on the back that leaned slightly right. "Sir, it's Jay. I got into the trade program in South Boston. Using the knife already. Thank you." Bob pinned it to a small cork square he hung by the back door, next to the judge's order and a library schedule. And every time he passed it, he felt a clean line of gratitude run through him, like an invisible brace inside a wall. Sometimes when a car slowed outside the cottage at dusk, his chest tightened the way it had on the day at the gas station, but the feeling passed when the car rolled on. And he told the group about that too, how fear leaves echoes, and a woman across from him said that is normal, and then normal ends up feeling like a gift. He kept in touch with Miss Alvarez by phone. She said the clinic had handed over their records and that Dr. Hayes's informal screening was now a thick file on a different desk. She said the DA's office would likely ask him to testify for 15 minutes when the time came. And he said he would show up in his best jacket and speak plain. He saw Deputy Marsh once at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning with her husband and a bag of peaches. She grinned and called him Mr. Whitaker, like a teacher calling roll. And he said, "Just Bob," and bought a basket and asked how many days it had been since the hearing. And she said, 28, without looking at a calendar. And he liked that about her. On a cool afternoon, he decided to build a small porch swing for the cottage, even though the rental had no hooks or beams for it. He went to a lumber yard and picked out 2 lengths of cedar, cut them straight with a handsaw, because sometimes the old way keeps a man honest, sanded the edges until they felt like river stones, drilled the bolt holes, and tied proper knots in 2 new ropes. He hung it from a simple frame he built from 4x4 posts and set the feet in concrete. And when he sat down and felt the clean give of the ropes, he thought, this is what a second chapter should feel like. Familiar motion, new view. One evening, he opened the small wooden box on the table and took out the folded receipt with "Run Now" pressed hard into it. And he set it next to his notebook and the postcard and looked at all 3, not to relive fear, but to see the path. A note, a step, a fresh sentence. He kept helping at the group as the weeks went on. A woman whose brother wanted to handle the accounts for ease brought in papers, and Bob pointed to the lines that mattered and said, "Ask a lawyer to read every word, and if someone says you're confused, show them your notebook." He did not say Linda's name unless asked. When someone did ask whether she had called, he said the truth. There were messages early on, nothing lately. And he wished her counsel and consequences in equal measure, because both were the right tools for different parts of the same broken thing. On Sundays, he called Claire if she could not drive down, and they made the video work on the phone, even though the sound cut sometimes. His grandson showed him a paper airplane, and Bob showed the boy how to pinch the trailing edge so it would turn right without a fight. As summer edged in, he learned the pair of ospreys favored the same light pole, and that at low tide the crabs scuttled sideways under the dock like small machines. He learned which neighbor kept a spare wrench, which morning the trash truck came, which path from the cottage to the river was best for his knee. He did not feel brave every minute. He felt ordinary most days, which he decided was the best victory. And if he had to name the one thing that had changed inside him and stayed changed, he would write it in his notebook in the same plain hand he used for everything now. I will listen to the small voice that says, "Step away," and I will never get back in a car that feels wrong. When he closed the notebook on that line, he did not need to underline it. He had built a life around it. Autumn came soft to the river, with the ospreys quieting and the marsh grass turning a pale gold, and Bob kept his days steady until the letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon asking him to testify in the criminal case against Rick Nolan and the clinic. He read it at the small table by the window, wrote the date and time in his spiral, called Claire, and set his best jacket on the chair so it would not gather dust. On the morning of the hearing, the air was cool enough for a sweater, and Claire drove while Bob watched the road signs slide by in clean order. Gloucester, West Point, then the county building where he had already learned the shape of rooms that listen. Ms. Alvarez met them in the hallway with a quiet, "We'll keep it simple." And inside the courtroom, the prosecutor laid the path in straight boards. The emails with after placement and side entrance. The river care charge, the draft guardianship filing in the wrong county, the cleaned audio from the coffee bar that caught after lunch, paperwork, and the low voice saying, "We'll control," before the hiss. Jay sat at the back with a fresh haircut and a tie that still made him fidget, and when his turn came, he told the story again, the way people who have decided to be useful tell it. Without extra words, without fear, just the facts, and the note he had pressed into an old man's hand because it was the only safe way. Bob followed, steady at the rail, answered each question plain, and when the prosecutor asked if he recognized the paper on the table, he said, "Yes," and read the 2 words in heavy block letters, "Run now," without making them bigger or smaller than they were. Then he added, "I told my wife I was going to the bathroom," so the room would understand how ordinary words can open a door. Dr. Hayes appeared by subpoena again, thinner now, eyes tired, and when the board's letter was entered, interim suspension pending full review, he swallowed and said he had relied on spousal report and industry practice, and the judge reminded him that the practice of medicine was not the practice of convenience. Rick Nolan, in a dark suit that did not fit his shoulders, stared at the table while his lawyer whispered, During a short recess, he agreed to a plea on attempted financial exploitation and conspiracy, and later the judge read the sentence in the same plain voice she used for everything. Time in state custody, restitution, a ban from any work touching estates or elder care, and a no-contact order with Bob and his family. Dr. Hayes's part was referred to the board and to prosecutors in his own county. Linda's case came last, and she stood very straight and pled to a lesser count of filing false statements and accepted probation, mandatory counseling, and the permanent no-contact order. She did not look at Bob, and he did not look at her, because the court had already said the only things left to say. Outside, the hallway smelled of floor wax and cold air rising from a vent. Claire hugged her father and said, "It's done." And Ms. Alvarez pressed certified copies into a folder and said, "Keep these with your notebook." And Jay waited by the elevator until Bob stepped toward him and said, "There's a diner around the corner." And the boy smiled in a way Bob recognized from students who had finished a hard cut and wanted to share a soda. They sat in a booth that smelled like coffee and bacon and talked about easy things: Jay's trade program, a machining class he liked, a teacher who ran the shop like a ship. And when the check came, Bob pulled from his pocket a folded plan he had drawn on graph paper the night before, a small porch swing with simple angles and knots marked step by step, and slid it across. "For your first Saturday off," he said. "Every good place needs something solid to sit on." Jay ran a finger along the pencil lines as if they were raised like grain and said he would build it and send a picture, and Bob believed him. Back at the River Cottage, the days took their shape again. Library in the mornings, small repairs in the afternoon, group on Wednesdays where he sat in a metal chair and listened to a woman read a list of charges against a cousin who had borrowed her car and almost borrowed her bank account. And when she finished, he said, "Write down every call, every date. Take that to the sheriff. You're not being dramatic. You're being clear." And she nodded and folded the paper with both hands like something worth keeping. He mailed a thank you letter to the gas station manager with a note about Jay, and a week later a box arrived with a blue cap from the store and a card signed by the whole crew. He pinned the card on the corkboard under the postcard with the mountain lake, and the board looked to him like a little wall of proof that ordinary courage travels. On a bright Saturday, he drove with Claire to drop off a bag at the donation center, and on the way back, passed a different highway station with the same promise on its sign: gas, food, clean restrooms. He asked her to pull in, not because he needed gas, but because he wanted to stand for a minute under the same kind of roof where his life had turned. He bought 2 waters and left a 20 at the counter with a simple, "For the next person." And when the clerk tried to hand it back, he said, "Keep it for when someone looks like they don't know what to do." And the clerk, who could have been Jay's cousin, tucked it in a jar with a quiet, "Yes, sir." Summer leaned into fall. The ospreys migrated. The library put a small sign by the door asking for volunteers to read to children on Thursday mornings. And Bob signed up for the first slot and read Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel in a slow voice that made the kids lean forward. And he watched their eyes when the town gathered to see a machine dig with heart, because he liked stories where skill and stubborn kindness win the day. He kept the swing he had built for the cottage oiled and smooth, and sometimes, as the light fell, he would touch the rope knot and think about how a knot holds because it is tied right and checked often, not because you wish it would. He thought about marriage that way too now. What holds, what does not, and how both answers can be true without hatred. When people in the group asked what he had learned most, he said it in the same simple order every time. Write the date. Say what you see. Tell someone who wears a badge. Bring a lawyer who speaks plain. Keep your own words on paper so no one can hand you theirs and call them yours. And if your gut says a road is wrong, step off and breathe until you hear yourself again. He did not make himself a hero in his telling. He made space for the boy with the note, the deputy with the steady eyes, the daughter with the lists, the lawyer who laid planks, the judge who said the court recognized his voice. On the first cold night, he pulled a blanket over his knees on the swing and watched the river turn black and silver. A car slowed and then rolled on. A heron lifted its head and settled again. He wrote one more line in his spiral by the porch light. A stranger's warning, a plain sentence, a door that led to the rest of my life. And he smiled because the words were not fancy and did not need to be. He knew what had saved him at the pump and in the hall and on the stand. Simple truth spoken on time. He also knew the line he would keep as long as he kept breath. The one he offered to anyone who sat beside him and asked how he had done it. I listened to the note and to myself. I told my wife I was going to the bathroom. The attendant told me the truth, and I never got back in that car again.